Welcome to StartHer, the podcast dedicated to sharing stories that ignite female entrepreneurs into action. I'm your host, Elizabeth Godey, and I'm here to fan the flame of your entrepreneurial spirit. Each week, we bring to you inspiring stories of women trailblazers from around the world who have sparked change in their industries, powered their ideas into thriving businesses, and pioneered their way to success. So, whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a startup enthusiast, or a seasoned business leader, join us as we delve into the journeys of these incredible women whose tales will surely ignite a spark in each one of us. Today, my guest is Cierra Lueck. She has helped over 300 businesses build across their audiences and groups on Facebook, resulting in consistent and predictable 5 to 7 figure months with smaller audiences of highly qualified leads. She has been a featured speaker of Taylor Welch, Rich Chaufin, and John Madison, and is the author of Not a Sales Book. I am so excited to have her here with us today. She is a wife of 18 years to an Army veteran and a mother of 5 kids, one of which being a brain tumor survivor. She is passionate about supporting industry experts to get their voices heard by the people that need them the most with high organic visibility and engagement. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today. Cierra, thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to get the chance to inspire women all around the world. I think that you're doing a really cool thing with the StartHer podcast. So thank you.
Well, of course. So let's start at the beginning. You obviously have an incredibly successful business where you're helping inspire other businesses. So what was your inspiration point? Why did you decide to start on this path?
If you look back at most entrepreneurs' life and I look back at mine, the majority of us started with something small as a kid. And so for me, I really was entrepreneurial from the time I was little. I was trying to create things that I could sell to my friends because there was this one time I was at the store with my mom and my mom looked at something on the shelf. I used to go to the store with her. She would just buy me like something small every time we went. So I got really excited every time we got to go to the store. And there was this one day that I asked her for something and she was like, "We don't have the money for that. No, I'm not going to get it for you." And I remembered that moment and I was like, "Oh, well then I just need to make money." And so I started creating little things. Every time she did a garage sale, I would do a lemonade stand or soda stand sometimes and just take my parents' sodas and sell them, soda cans. And so it started when I was really young. And then more recently, because I've been married for nearly 20 years now, in the beginning of our marriage, we had a business together and I depended a lot on my husband. And so I deferred to him. I just felt like that was what, as a wife, you were supposed to do. And so that's what I did is I just deferred to him in a lot of ways. In the beginning of our marriage, I was still really young. When we got married, I was 18. And more recently, about 3.5 years ago, he was in the military whenever I launched my own consulting business. And it just got to this point where with my son's health issues, I was looking at my son and I was recognizing that I needed to give him a reason to live. That's a really long story, so we might dive into it today. We might not. You can definitely find my story. I've shared about it all over the internet. With everything that was happening with him though, and him just getting really depressed, and I needed to give him a reason to survive. And so I looked at it and I recognized that I wasn't showing my kids firsthand that they could succeed, that they could have big dreams and achieve those. And if my husband hadn't been in the military, I would have deferred to him. I would have let him take charge and him lead that. And I'm so glad that he wasn't able to assist or help me. He was so busy, he couldn't. And I launched and started my own business and made $100,000 in my first 6 months. And then since then, I've crossed over the $600,000 collected mark, and we've done a lot of amazing things. We've served a lot of really amazing people, and I have some of the highest level clients I've ever had now. So, for anyone listening on just this one spot, if you are considering starting something and you're hesitating, just pull the trigger. Just do it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, I agree. That's really, really great feedback. So one of the things that a lot of times, I focus on is sort of where this trajectory point was, but other than sort of your son being the catalyst, I guess is what I would say is in building your business as monumental and huge as it is now. I mean, realistically, you already had experience building businesses starting back when you were a very young person, which is incredible.
I mean, kind of. I mean, making a few $100s here and there and whatnot, I wouldn't necessarily call that like amazing business knowledge. I would call it spirit. I would call it mindset. I would call it energy. But I wouldn't call it like amazing business acumen. I would definitely not say that the stuff that I did prepared me on the level that I'm at now. There's a book out right now called 10X is easier than 2X.
Yeah.
And the concept there is that we have these monumental or exponential growth moments in our lives. And I would say that the growth that I've had over the last 3 years since launching my own consulting business has been exponential. And I've kind of tapped into those ways that I can leverage exponential growth again and again and again. And I recognize when I get to plateaus, it's very similar. It's so funny how many parallels there are to what one would have as a fitness journey and what one would have as a business journey. There's so many different parallels, but like in the fitness world, like you like plateau at some point, you like stop losing weight no matter how hard you're working out or no matter what foods you're deciding not to eat or deprive yourself of. You just stop losing weight. And I feel like that happens in business too, to where there's these moments where we just kind of plateau, and you have to know how to do those exponential growth moments to get to that next level. And that's something that I've become really good at just in the last 3 years. I don't feel like I had that intuitive knowledge or that know-how of how to like force exponential growth, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And actually, I love that book as well. And for our listeners who do not understand sort of what the difference is between 2X and 10X in summary, 2X is basically if you have a job and you know what the criteria is to get to the next level of your job. So you want to become a manager, something like that. That's a 2X jump. A 10X jump is I'm going to do this completely in a different way, in an innovative way, and create something that does not already have a predetermined path. So they both are still growth. They're just at very different rates. And I love you talking through that, Cierra, because it's such a great moment to talk about. And I think as an entrepreneur, all entrepreneurs are 10Xers in some way, shape, or form. And whether or not they're flexing that muscle entirely like you are, that's where I think, you've certainly been able to help. I know that I read in your intro that you've helped more than 300 people be able to grow into these 6 and 7 figures. Can you dive into a little bit more specifically about what you do to help them get that type of growth?
Yeah. So I started out in a really interesting niche that I didn't realize at the time, but it was about to have its boom right after I started in it. There were a lot of people who had online groups. I'd actually been working in online groups since I have a 15-year-old son. He just turned 15 this year. And when I was pregnant with him, I was a group admin over several groups on a website called Cafe Mom. And so this was way before Facebook groups even existed. And I was adminning groups there. So we were starting these online communities for all of these people. Like this was like way before COVID was even like a blink in somebody's eye. We were trying to figure out how to connect online because a lot of us as stay-at-home moms felt really isolated. And so we started building these online communities there. And that's when it started. And since then, I actually got several sponsorships back then, and I was doing stuff for me alone. And then I started giving a lot of marketing advice away for free for several years for people with online communities. And then about 4 years ago, I reached out to this woman because I was doing some kind of network marketing thing, like a lot of us stay-at-home moms start with. We start with we get sucked into network marketing and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this amazing business because of network marketing. And if you do that and you're successful, amazing. I love you. I love it. Most of the women who do it are not, and they don't have that story. And I was one of those women who was not, and I did not have that story. So I started doing a lot of research into specifically why some of these ladies would succeed, and gentlemen. Some of these people would succeed and get wildly successful, what seemed like so fast. Like it was just like they'd start and they'd be successful. And I was like, what's different between them and me? And what I found is all of them had a background in either sales or marketing. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to start studying and become a wizard at sales and marketing. And so that's what I did. And I reached out to a local entrepreneur that was in the area where I lived. She was trying to start a group. I wanted to start a group and I was going to start my own, but then I saw she already had one. It had like 60 or so people in it already. It was completely dead. And I was like, hey, if I could show you how to get engagement in the group, if I could help you grow it really fast, if I could show you like ways to monetize it, would you be interested and make me admin? And she said yes, made me admin immediately. In the first 30 days, we had 2 different ways that we monetized it. By 3 months, we had more than 500 very active local women entrepreneurs inside of it. And then I took a step back because I saw that the partnership was just not a good fit for me anymore. I wasn't their local. She was getting more connection from the group than I was because she was their local with all of the ladies. And so I blessed off. I gave her all these brilliant ideas to move forward with, and she did. And she got featured. I talked to her about getting featured on the news, about how to get other speaking engagements that were local for the local university, for the women in business part, which is super cool. And so she got those speaking engagements, got featured on the news. The group exploded to like 1,500 local women entrepreneurs in a city that is only 40,000 people.
Wow.
So it's incredible. And then they did like a membership launch, and that membership launch with a low ticket offer, I'm pretty positive had between like $20,000 to $30,000 brought in from that membership launch. And so she was able to take something that was not doing anything for her, that was not working, and she turned it into what she really wanted, which was a life-giving atmosphere where these women could come and collect and gather together online and be able to connect while they're still doing all of their mom things and stuff like that, because the majority of the women were moms. There were a lot that weren't, but the majority of them were moms, so they didn't feel so isolated. And I feel like that was kind of the catalyst. That was my jumping off point. Now I've worked with so many different entrepreneurs to create amazing and thriving online communities. If you look under my name, it says community engagement strategist. And it's because my goal is actually to help people create this wild engagement that like starts a movement. Kind of like, we have all these great movements throughout history where it's like there's the civil rights movement that created out brilliant things like the Black History Month and created out several days of celebration. It created out and made changes to our society and the way that we shape our society because of that movement. And I want to help these entrepreneurs who are experts who just can't get their voices heard to be able to create these movements with online communities. And will that always be Facebook groups? Probably not. Facebook wasn't even a blink in anybody's eye when MySpace existed. So that's going to shift and adapt over time. And I think people need to know, how do I shift and adapt? And how do I create this mass movement to where all the people who need this can hear my voice? And so that's really what I do.
Excellent.
In a long nutshell.
I love the long nutshell because I think it explained and really visualized for people, in a tangible way what it is that you do. And I love that. And movements, I think, are so important when you think about culture, in creating sort of that culture and people that, are drawn to you because they feel connected to you and in addition. So that's
there's so many people around the world who just like call themselves like the weirdo or the odd one out. And I guarantee you there's somebody else in the world who likes almost every single thing that you like. They have followed a very similar life path to what you followed, and you just don't even know that they exist. And because we have the internet now, those kind of people can connect more often and not feel so isolated.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just saw something yesterday that somebody had cut together a video, and it's somebody that I never would have realized had also an interest in sort of the comic book side of things. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that they loved the same things I do. So it's exactly that.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing through sort of your path. I mean, thank you so much for telling us, about what you're doing to service people now. And I want to jump back into this. So you did network marketing to begin with, and was that sort of the first thing that when you got into your adult, so beyond sort of your lemonade stands and things like that, and you got into your career, was network marketing the first thing that you did when you got into your career, or did you do other sort of odd jobs or other jobs?
I mean, we could technically say that because my mom was into Mary Kay. My mom did Amway for a time, but when she was in Mary Kay, like she did this one event that she let me be a part of because they would do like the whole like makeup thing. You would wash your face, you would give yourself this makeover and learn these new makeup techniques with this new makeup colors that just came out or were hot or fresh on the scene. And then you do a photo shoot afterwards. And so she brought me to this photo shoot. Experience, and I was just like, oh my God, that was so much fun. And as a little kid, I'm just like, I just have like this energy and drive to do big things all the time like that. Anything I love, I was just super passionate about. And so I was like, Mom, we need to do another one of these like super soon. And so I was like pushing her to continue doing these events. And I would get to be a part of them, and I would help set everything up for her because I just found it was so much fun and I wanted to be a part of it, not realizing at the time like how much she loved it. Like looking back and talking and having those conversations with her, I was just a little kid, so I didn't understand. So technically you could say that that's where I started, although I didn't make any money with it. I wasn't doing any of the business side of it. I was just having fun. I actually got into on the community side and the audience growth and the engagement and everything like that. I really got into that whenever I started when I was about like 13 years old. I was an intern at a summer camp, and it was a camp that I had gone to every summer as a kid with the youth of my church. And when I would go through for the summer and I would work there, it just like sparked something inside of me where it's like there was this energy and there was this passion, and people were excited about being a part of a church service in a way that I didn't have during regular church services throughout the year. And so I just loved being in that energy and that atmosphere and that environment. And as a kid, I was like, I really want my youth group to be like this. Like I want to have this energy all the time. And so I started trying to figure out how to do that. And I had all of these ideas, but because I was young, and because I didn't have like a background or experience or testimonials or anything like that, obviously at 13 years old, 13, 14, 15, they at the church that we were at currently, they didn't even let me be a youth leader, and they wouldn't listen to they were like, oh, that's a good idea. And then they wouldn't do anything with my idea. So it's like I had like an instant cap or an instant ceiling on what I was able to accomplish. And it wasn't until later when my husband and I got married. So I became a youth leader. We switched churches and I became a youth leader at the next church because they didn't know my background. They didn't know like the mistakes that I'd made or the bad things I'd done. So it was like a fresh start. And I became a youth leader at that church. I still had ideas that would get capped and wouldn't get implemented. And it wasn't until I married my husband, we moved into a new church. And then we were helping with like rapid church launches and rapid growth. And churches don't have a very big marketing budget. So then I was like sitting there and figuring out like, what can we do to get this organic growth on a local level? And that's really where it started for me, was just doing it on a local level. And so I started in the beginning of our marriage, the first 10 years, I started working with local churches. We started working with like local businesses, like small local businesses, started working with nonprofits. And when I say working with, I mean not getting paid and doing it for free because I didn't know I could charge. So imagine me doing lots of work for 10 years out of the goodness of my heart. that might resonate with people. And so
I think as women, sorry for interrupting, but I was going to say as women, I think we do that a lot more than we should.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so the first like decade of my life was spent working really hard and not getting paid for it and thinking that that's what I was supposed to do. Thinking that I had to just give away my services for free and hoping that eventually somebody would be like, wow, this is amazing. We want to actually pay you to do this in the future. And that's just literally not how it works. And so, what was the crazy statement that like old grandmas used to say? Like, if you can get why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free?
Yeah.
I mean, that was used in a very different way, but I feel like it's exactly the same principle. It's like, why would anyone pay you when they can get it for free? And it's like, they don't respect you. They don't take as much action with it. They don't implement it in the way that you you're like, no, this is the way it has to be implemented to work. And then they like just do bits and pieces of it and stuff like that. And so it wasn't until I got a mentor, and it was really scary. I paid $10,000 into this mentorship, but I was like, if I could just learn how to at least cover the payments, make enough money to cover the payments, I'd be golden. And so I put it on a credit card. And when I jumped into that, it's like, I didn't get my first client until 2 months into it. And I told the person, he was like, well, how much is it? I didn't even know it was a sales call. I'd had like 11 sales calls. They were all no's up to that point. I wasn't like brilliant at sales at that point or anything. But he asked, well, he's like, well, how much is it? How much is your offer? And I was like, oh, it's just 3,800. And he was like, okay, cool. I want to do it. Do you have anything like a payment plan? And I was like, I was scrambling, trying to figure out Stripe in the moment. And he came in on a payment plan of 1,900. And I remember getting off of that call, going to my husband, and it's like, I had a check. I didn't actually have a check. Does anyone do paper checks anymore? I don't know. But it was like I was stupid excited about that 1,900. And I went out to my husband and I was like, I just collected $1,900 and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I know if you're getting paychecks from a company and you invested like 40 or 80 hours, like this was like a 30-minute call. And I collected $1,900 for future services and stuff. And so that was just so revolutionary for me. I didn't even know that people would be willing to pay me that much. And then that client, I wasn't even confident in my own abilities at that point. And that client, in the first like 2 weeks of implementation, ended up gathering like $10,000 from a completely dead group. And so it was just like, then he paid me the other half early. And it just built all this confidence inside of me. And I think, it's like, you have to win and you have to help others win to have that confidence to move forward. Shoot. Yeah. I did it again. I don't even remember what the question was.
No. You're doing fine. Everything that you provided back was just perfect. We were talking about sort of where you started your career, like what was your first job? And I think you actually sort of took us through most of the whole path. And actually, fun fact for you, I actually used to work for Amway Corporate. So someday we'll have a separate conversation about that. So moving forward, so you obviously are very passionate about what you do. And I think that probably shows in all the success of your clients that are out there. But I do want to jump back and talk a little bit about this inspiration, because we talked about it in the very beginning, but I wanted to come back to it now. So you said part of what's really been a catalyst and driver for your success, outside of the story that we just heard about the being able to hold the check, or I guess now we do printouts from Stripe, is your son. And your son, I had mentioned it in the intro, has is a brain tumor survivor. And so can you speak a little bit about how your business was sort of an inspiration for him, and ultimately helped make you really successful?
So I think it's vice versa, that his story and his journey was an inspiration for my business.
Okay.
And the way that happened is I didn't actually start my business until after we discovered he had a brain tumor. And what it was is, I remember it like it was yesterday, the summer of 2019, the year before COVID. So before COVID, everyone else, like COVID was like the year that their world fell apart. For me, it was the year before COVID. And COVID was actually a great year for me. So in 2019, the summer of 2019, it was July 28th, the Saturday morning. It sticks out in my mind. You know how trauma does that sometimes. It just like pinpoints and drops a pin in your life story, in your history. And so it was that morning. He was preparing, we slept in, it was a Saturday. He was preparing brunch because we taught all of our kids how to cook from a young age. So he was making grilled cheese sandwiches for us. He's 11 years old at the time. And his sister's mad at him. Like they're so close in age. They're 19 months apart. I thought that was going to make them best friends. It did not. It made them like frenemies. And so his sister was mad at him, and she was sitting at the dining table. We had a nice big open concept. He's in the kitchen. My husband and I are on the couch, and he's cooked lots of times before. So he has autonomy in the kitchen, right? So my daughter's sitting at the dining table, and suddenly, even though she's mad at him, I hear her and she's like, Israel, are you okay? Israel, did you burn yourself? And it's just like kind of quiet and hushed. And so I tap my husband on the leg and I'm like, hey, can you go in there and check on that? And he goes into the kitchen right behind us. And it's just completely silent for like a minute or two. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get up and go check what's going on. And I walk in there, and to my horror, in silence, it felt like time stood still in that moment. My husband is holding my son's hands over the sink, and it is just absolutely quiet, like eerily quiet. And I look at his hands, and the fingers on, or not the fingers, but the skin on his fingers and palms looks like egg noodles. And I'm just like horrified, because I'm like, what happened? It's like all of these questions suddenly start firing off, and I don't know what to do. And I kind of am in that moment of shock. And then suddenly he snaps to and starts screaming in pain. And it's like, then it's just a little bit of chaos and pandemonium. And it's like, when you're in fight or flight, it's like, sometimes when my kids are hurt, my husband is like the perfect person, because he knows exactly what to do to triage, to get the stuff taken care of. And for me, I'm very, in the past, I would get a little bit more scattered. And so I actually ended up becoming a person who, in the moment of that, I'm like, okay, assessing like, what do we need to do? And it's like, okay, you go get Band-Aids, you go do this, you go do that. And so my husband sent me, because I didn't know how to handle this one. My husband sent me to go get first aid kit stuff, and we ended up, he had some special stuff from his military career, and he put it on my son's hands, and then wrapped it in gauze. And we called and we ended up having to go down to ER. So we drove 30 minutes down to Lawton. We were in Oklahoma at the time. We drove 30 minutes down to Lawton. And then we ended up having to drive an hour and a half back the other way to another hospital that evening, because they didn't have a burn facility at the ER that was closest to us. And so we ended up going to the burn facility, and it was when we were at the first hospital that we realized it was because he was having seizures. Wow. For anyone who doesn't know, seizures are not just where people start like rapidly shaking and all of that kind of stuff, which is what you would expect from what's widely spread. There's something called focal seizures that most people don't know about. And these are early warning signs. And so some of the stuff that my son had happen is he was starting to like pee himself, and he didn't remember peeing himself. And that was because of the focal seizures. And so what a focal seizure looks like is the person just spaces out. They're not really responsive to you, or if they are, it kind of comes out like sludge to where you can't really understand what they're saying. It sounds like they're mumbling or something, and they look like they're still doing the activity. Their body is still operating and doing the stuff that was programmed into it to do. And so it's really scary, like super scary. So from that point, we found out a little bit later it was because of a brain tumor after we went in for testing that next week, because we had to do testing before we could do the hand surgery. He ended up having 4 skin graft surgeries and 1 brain surgery. So we were in and out of the hospitals a lot that year. For the first 2 months, I was with him almost constantly, because we weren't sure when he would have a seizure. We weren't sure when something would happen. So we'd lay him down at night. I would be super worried. I'd go to bed and then wake up the next morning, and I would be with him constantly throughout the day, because he couldn't use his hands because of the brain tumor. He also couldn't do anything on wheels, like a hoverboard or anything like that. He couldn't do anything that could potentially hurt his head. And so like he couldn't do any sports. And so he couldn't write, he couldn't draw, he couldn't play on the computer, he couldn't hold a remote, he couldn't hold a fork to feed himself, he couldn't go to the bathroom or shower himself. So dad would help him shower, and I would have to take him to the bathroom as an 11-year-old young man. And so it's like all of his dignity just like was gone. Right. And it was during that time that we were testing out different medications to try and see what would help like stall or slow the seizures, because they never actually stopped. And there was one medication that just amplified his depression, and we didn't realize it, like, because you'd have to test it. So it would be like a week before we'd get a new medication. And his depression got so bad that I walked in on him about to kill himself. Oh. And that happened like 2 or 3 times. And it wasn't just like him, it was the medication amplifying stuff. So he became incredibly depressed. He was in constant pain. And because the whole goal of the first 2 skin graft surgeries was completely triage, just to save the nerve endings in his hands. Mm-hmm. And it was during that time that like I realized that what my son needed and what my other kids really needed was they needed like positive, like Tony Robbins' mom to come in there and be like, oh my God, you can do and be whatever you want in life as long as you pursue it with all of your might. And they needed somebody to come in there and tell them that all the time and just be like that positive energy in their life. And I was going into my closet and crying so that they wouldn't see that. And then I'd come back out and I'd say these really positive, life-giving things to them. And I remember one day that I was watching Save the Last Dance, the documentary about Michael Jordan. And I recognized, it was about 2 months in, I recognized that my kids were sitting here watching like Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande and Mr. Beast. And they were watching all of these people that they're being told are amazing and elite. And they're looking at them and thinking, well, they had something different in life that I don't have. And I recognized that it was like secondhand or thirdhand knowledge and that they weren't seeing success in their life firsthand. And it was that moment that I was like, I have to succeed and I have to show them that it's possible. Like, I can't be telling them, like, I went into my closet that day and I came out and just what I said earlier, like, I told my kids, you can do and be whatever you want in life as long as you pursue it with all of your might. And that's the day that it hit me that I wasn't showing them that firsthand, that I had to step up and I had to be the one to show them what success looks like. Because if I didn't do it, who was going to do it? Who's that going to fall to?
Right.
And so that was the day I decided. And I just started researching everything I could find online. And I had already purchased into some like DIY course that I thought was going to have coaching and didn't. It was like $2,000. I didn't know that was low ticket because to me at the time that was high ticket. And so I didn't get coaching and I tried that and I held my first event and 3 people showed up. One was my mom and it was a paid event. One was my mom and one was my aunt who my mom paid for. Yeah. And then one was one of the ladies who was in the program with me who wanted to support me. Yeah. And so it was those 3 people. The event went well. They liked it. They enjoyed it. It was good information. But I wouldn't say that I was like wildly successful with that event. And that was like December of 2019. And so I kept researching. My mom ended up finding a book of the mentor that I bought into later. She found a book online. She was a part of a funnel and she let me borrow it. And so I read through the book and I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I need to do ads at some point. I still like have not gotten into it. I'm about to launch into ads. So it's like, it took me 3 years to build up the confidence to do this, guys. That being said, I read that book and then I was so mad that I didn't have it on my own shelf that I like went and researched it online and found it and purchased it. And then 2 days later, I got a call from their sales team, not realizing it was their sales team. Yeah. And I got a call 2 days later from their team and they were like, hey, we just wanted to see if there was any help, any other additional resources we could give you or any kind of help that you needed. And they walked me through and I told them, I was like, well, I just registered for getting a certification in college. I got a scholarship for it. And so, or a grant, I got a grant for it for getting a certification at a university for social media marketing and digital advertising. And then I was like, and I also just jumped into a video marketing course, which was like $500. So I spent $2,000 grant dollars here and $500 here. And he was like, I was like, so I'm going to build out this plan. And then in May, I'm going to do something really amazing. And so this was March. And it was like literally 2 weeks after my son's brain surgery. And I was just like, okay. He asked me, he was like, why are you waiting until May? Why not just start getting clients now? And I was like, I heard him and I was like, well, why not? You know, that was the question that went off in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, why not? And then I was like, honestly, I just don't know how. I don't have a clear pathway. And he's like, well, we have that inside of our program and we could show you. And I was like, that's cool. And then I was like, but I don't even know what I would offer them right now. Like, I don't have anything built out. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, you mentioned about like the Facebook group stuff. He's like, why not just do that? And I was like, cool, why not? And that was when I decided to go all in on it. And it was like one conversation I attribute to that. And he actually gave me the recording of that conversation about a year later. And so I have that, but that was like one of those moments in my life where just everything shifted and changed through one phone call. And I would encourage anybody, if you're doing sales calls or like even Elizabeth, like today, it's like, you never know how much one call is going to change somebody's life. Right. And they usually don't tell you, by the way. And so if you are ever feeling defeated, just like imagine what happened to me and let me be that person for you, and just pretend like I'm the one person, because there are seriously so many people that you've probably touched and changed their lives forever with just one call, and you just don't even know about it.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I think that we all spend a lot of time, and certainly, a lot of your business, if not all of it, is spent online. And, you do these calls and you go live and you show up and you do all these things. And then, I know they're referred to as vanity metrics, but they really do affect your mood sometimes. So I am absolutely going to use your story to keep me propped up, because gosh, I wish I had a recording of exactly the pivotal moment that I went through, instead of just freeze it in my mind. So moving into sort of the last sort of closing piece of this, a couple of questions for you. One is, what was the biggest surprise that you had? So would you say it was sort of that moment of the why not moment, or what would you say has been your biggest surprise in your entrepreneurial journey?
The biggest surprise. That's interesting, because I feel like there's so many different ways that could be taken. Like there's so many different ways that surprise can be evolved into. Do you have a specific kind of surprise that you would go for with that question?
No, I usually let people take it in whatever direction that they want to. If you want, I can give you some boundaries.
Well, so there's surprises in the aspect of, I thought when you hired people that they just followed through on what they said. And I was very shocked and blindsided to find out that you would hire people and they would sell you something that they didn't have, that they didn't actually have proof or results or evidence for. I didn't think that people were like that. So I was very naive when I was hiring people for the first time. That's one of the things that I now stand against in my marketing, is like people who market something that's not true, or they take and twist their past or their testimonials to say something that actually isn't reality. It isn't the real thing about what happened. I know a few marketers right now who are amazing at client acquisition and then suck at fulfillment. And it's like, I love you and I hope that you get better at it, but right now you suck at fulfillment. And the thing is like, they'll take like a principle of like something that they've accomplished, and they'll attribute it to something that it's not even attributable to, or they'll leave out the details, like consciously and purposefully leave out the details of other things that had to be in place to make that happen. And so these people, Brian Tracy gave me this really good advice like 5 or 6 years ago when I was following his stuff. And he said that if you want to do something in life, no matter what that something is, something that you want to attain that somebody else has already done, just follow their journey and look at what they did to get there. And then just imitate or mimic exactly what they did, and you'll get there. And when these entrepreneurs tell this story in such a way that is not the actual journey of how they got there, all these people are taking this amazing advice. It is such good advice from Brian Tracy and other men and women like him who say to mimic it. They're mimicking just like they said, except that they're mimicking the wrong things, because these people are selling a story that's not true. Right. And okay, but now that's got me thinking about one of our favorite martial artists. I'm trying to remember. Tony Jaa is his name. And the thing that was so remarkable about Tony Jaa is that he watched all of these martial arts movies from the time he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And while watching these martial arts movies, he did not know that they were special effects or that they used strings to do and perform these acts inside of these martial arts movies. So he practiced doing them and became very agile and fit and was able to do things without special effects. And then when he got discovered, his movies were phenomenal in what he was able to do, because he didn't realize that they were like double takes or multiple takes, and that they were special effects and that there were strings. And so he learned how to like jump up the walls, and he learned how to do these like really high flips, and he learned how to like jump through tiny spaces and slide through them without getting hurt. And all of these like really crazy physical feats that you would just think is completely impossible without special effects. He learned how to do them because it created this new belief inside of his mind. And so I can see the positive benefit of these stories that they're selling, that like you can do it with just this, because it opens the mind, like, how can I do it with just this? And I can see the positive side of that. But at the same time, just the amount of people who buy into these programs and then the small percentage of who actually get results is really sad for me. And so it's very important to me to empower people who can get people real results, to be able to get their voices heard, and to be able to create like not a justice system, not a justice system, but like a feedback system, a feedback loop that allows people to see the reality of what's on the other side. Because you almost feel like everything's your fault if you don't get results inside of a program. And a lot of times it can be because people don't take action on something. And there's also the possibility that perhaps the program didn't have exactly what's needed and they shouldn't have sold certain people into it. And so in the beginning, just know there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be things that are made. And I would say that for me, to flip this like surprise element onto like the lesson learned, because realistically, I have surprises every single day, every single week, every single month. And a lot of them are big. And I'm like, ooh, ooh, that's new. With any surprise, it's like turning it around and learning from it, and finding the way forward. I told my kids and I told my clients recently, it's so funny how energy shifts in this way, and a lot of things happen very similarly at the same time. The lesson that was learned recently is that conflict is inevitable. Conflict is going to happen no matter what. And it's not about the conflict. It's what you do with the conflict. It's what happens afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so the way that you treat people is more important than the actual, here's a good phrase for it. It's better to do right than to be right. Mm-hmm. And so it's not about the conflict itself. It's about how you handle it afterwards. And so I've literally, with every mistake that I've made in my business, or that I feel that I've made, one of the things that I've learned to do is to, instead of apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry. And sometimes there are places where you should apologize. And that's what people are waiting for from you, is they really just wanted an apology. And if you would give them an apology, everything would be fine. In other areas, like with clients, for instance, if you apologize, it's like admitting fault, and then they have grounds for doing some kind of legal action. And so to protect yourself, what I recommend doing instead of apologizing is to say, I appreciate your patience. Because it's like, it's like saying, I'm human and you're human, and I appreciate your patience with me being human. Mm-hmm. And it's in that moment of appreciation where they start to think more highly of you. You're expressing how you think highly of them, and you're acknowledging it without saying like, I'm bad and I'm guilty, because you're not bad and you're not guilty. A lot of times it's accidents that happen. And so even if it's an accident, like, especially like I had a conversation, I have a 6-year-old, and I had a conversation with him, and he didn't feel, I guess it was my 9-year-old hurt him in this day, on this particular instance this last week. She didn't feel like she did anything wrong because it was an accident. And she was like, why do I have to apologize? And I was like, oh, that's such a good point. Like, why should you have to apologize when you didn't do it on purpose? And she feels like apologies are held for purposeful things, And so it's like, well, because even if you do it accidentally, you should not feel great about the fact that it happened in the first place. And so saying something along the lines of, I'm human, you're human. I appreciate your patience with the fact that this happened. It was an accident. And it's always about the way forward. And so this also dives into like another principle that I live by, which is, don't bring a problem to your mentors or your parents or your people or your team without possible solutions. And so there's like 3 different options whenever you have a problem. You can have multiple solutions. You can have and ask for like, which one should I do? You can have one solution and ask for feedback, or you can have no solution and be like, I tried and I just have no clue what to even do with this. And so one of those three options, but go through your options before you bring up the problems. Otherwise it's not as valuable for either person. So I just gave a lot of principles and a lot of lessons from like the surprise factor.
I know. I love it. It's going to be this entire time block in the podcast where people are going to be like, I really want to hear that part. So in addition to that, do you have employees?
I don't have like W-2 employees. I have 1099 contractors. I think that's like, I honestly feel like that's the best way to go in the beginning. Whenever you're first building your business, there's no need to have employees until you're ready to move into like S Corp territory, which we might be doing at some point over the next year. But whenever you're LLC, like having 1099 contractors is easier. It makes tax time really easy. We use TurboTax right now. We've done our own taxes since we had our construction business back in the day. So yeah, I don't have W-2 employees.
So what we talk about a lot on this is how we reduce the funding gap and the pay gap, right, with women to men. And so the reason why I always ask everyone is, do you have any employees, is really to get at, do you feel like you're making a difference in your business, addressing sort of the pay gap? So my question to you is, whether it's 1099 or it's W-2, do you feel like you compensate women at the same level as men? How do you feel like you're addressing that with the people that you have working?
I have one man on my team. It's my husband, and he definitely makes way less money than I do. So I just like swung it the opposite way. I was like matriarchy or something. Yeah, I've had very few men that I've worked with, and it's not because I don't like working with men. It's just because in the nature of what I do in my business, I require high empathy. And I honestly feel like women are better with empathy than men are, just because it's in our nature. And we talk about nature versus nurture. In our natural ability, we are more empathetic. And so because that's kind of my brand, it just makes sense to pay women and to hire women. And I actually, one of my favorites, like shout out to somebody who's on my team. She's in, so I have one team member who's in the Philippines. I have another one who's in South Africa. And in South Africa, like the exchange rate is so ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous, to where I've actually coached her through raising her prices, and she has raised her prices effectively over the last, because she came in as a client first and then I hired her. I told her, I was like, okay, well, raise your prices. And she did a few $100s. And then I was like, okay, cool. Now I'll buy your services. And it was like, she built a website for me last year. She's raised her prices since then. So do not take this as this is her price now. She built a website for me for $600. And that was after she raised her prices, because she was going to charge me so little money. I was like, girl, this is ridiculous. You can charge way more. And she's like, well, I feel bad because that's like so much money here. Like, that's like, we could do so much with that. And I was like, don't feel bad. Like, what we're doing is we're raising the economy of where you live. We're changing the city. We're changing the environment. And she's a mom. I think she has, I believe she has 2 daughters. I could be wrong on that. She might have another one that we just don't talk about, but I'm pretty sure, I know for sure she has 2 daughters. And so she's a mom, and she, I think, might be the primary breadwinner for her family. And it's something that, like, I'm so gifted that I'm able to do that. And she's not the first mom that I've hired. One of my team members last year, she no longer works with me, but last year she just had her first baby for the first time. And because of the position that I held for her, I was able to extend a full month of maternity, like paid maternity leave, which for a 1099 contractor, you don't have to do that. There's literally no requirement to do that. Right. But because of my business, I was able to extend that to her. And I just think that it's so cool to be able to, as an entrepreneur, change people's lives. And the only way you can do that is by charging more and selling higher services and stuff like that and making more money. That's really the only way that you can monetarily change people's lives and just change like the direction, like the entire direction of what they think is possible and where they think they can go, is by introducing that into their lives. I personally hate for money to be a limiting factor for anybody. Yeah. That's just something I hate. I hate money as a limiting factor. Whatever you dream in life, you can have that open opportunity. And I think that as far as the wage gap goes, like I really don't pay attention to it, because you can literally create whatever you want. And unless you're in a corporate world and you're stuck in corporate ways and you're doing a corporate job and stuff like that, and in which case be better than the other people there. I personally don't like the equal opportunity thing. And I know that this is really controversial to say that, but I don't like the equal opportunity thing, because what it's done is it's stopped the competitive nature of the hiring process, to where people actually work harder, to where now people actually, like, they're required to hire a certain number of women or a certain number of whatever. And so even if there's nobody available except this one person who is absolutely like not as skilled as all of the other candidates, they're required to hire that unskilled person, which defeats the purpose of being able to build this amazing business with the top experts. Right. There are amazingly skilled women out there, but they're just not applying for some of those equal opportunity jobs, which blows my mind. Like, the people who are unskilled are applying for these jobs and getting them because of the equal opportunity side of it. And so as far as bridging the wage gap, it's like, go out there and be the best, because you're capable of it.
I'll tell you why there aren't women filling those roles. And it's because we feel like we have to be overqualified for the position before we apply for it. But that's for another show. So I have two last questions for you. One is, if people want to connect with you, how do they find you?
First off, you can find me on Facebook. I'm there literally all the time. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on any social media. My name is Cierra Lueck. It's Cierra. Last name is Lueck. And you can find me literally anywhere. You can even Google me and you will find me all over the internet.
Excellent. And the last is, if you were to give one word or a short phrase as inspiration for future female entrepreneurs, what would that be?
There's so many I could go with. My favorite, though, is that the darkest storms are always followed by the brightest rainbows. So if you're in a storm, keep going. The rainbow's coming.
I love it so much. Well, Cierra, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute delight to have you. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us today on the StartHer podcast. It's been a pleasure bringing you the uniquely inspiring stories that ignite female entrepreneurs into action. I've been your host, Elizabeth Godey, and on behalf of all the awe-inspiring women entrepreneurs out there, I encourage you to not only dream big, but to ignite those dreams into action. Remember, every spark can lead to an extraordinary fire. So keep the spark alive, ladies, for today, tomorrow, and the vibrant future beyond. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to never miss a spark. Until next time, stay ignited. And I know that we have somebody who is still joining us live. And so I wanted to give the opportunity for people who are tuning in live, if they have any specific questions that they'd like to go over with Cierra, you can pop it in the chat and we can address those now. And if no one has any questions, then we'll sign off.
Super fun. I see Wendy had put in her name when she was on here, and then somebody else's Facebook user.
Yeah. It's one of those hazards of StreamYard. You have to actually give StreamYard permission to see who you are. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so we're going to sign off for today. But Cierra, I will definitely have you back again, because I have so many more questions for you and just not enough time.
Oh, I so appreciate you, Elizabeth. Thank you.